Yay. Okay, waiting to see the participants file in for attendees. Thank you everybody for coming. I'm really, really excited about this event. And Jen, thank you so much for doing this. I know it's close to Thanksgiving, but this long thread just fits perfectly with our store. We're a bookstore and a yarn shop, and you can kind of see the yarn in the background there. And we were really excited that you said yes to this event. And Maya, thank you for joining us from Southern California. I get really nervous when I do these, so I'm so sorry. I think almost everyone who signed in knows who you are, Jen, because they were really excited for this event. They were like, Jen Hewett, how did you get her? But Jen is an artist now living in Placerville, New York?
Nope, Hudson Valley.
Hudson Valley, sorry. Where did Placerville? We just talked about Hudson. And she's going to be in conversation with Mia. See, I am terrible at this. And Mia, I know you're a knitter and you're also a designer. But your real job is?
I'm a knitter, but my day job, my primary job, I guess, is a freelance writer and creative nonfiction.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Freelance writer. And you're teaching now.
I teach knitting sometimes. I taught more before the pandemic, so I'm hoping to start again in the future.
Yay. Okay, I'm going to just turn it over to Jen before I ruin everything. So Jen, thank you for taking it over. And I'm so happy to see we've got so many people here. So take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So yeah, I have released my book, This Long Thread, Women of Color, on Craft Community and Connection, and its publication date is going to be on Tuesday. So we're doing a little bit of a pre-launch event today. And I thought what we could do today, I've got Mia here to chat with me, and we'll talk more in a second about Mia's role in the book, because she's one of the first people I thought of when I found out I could move forward with this book. But the process of writing this book, I'll go over that a little bit, and then Mia and I will chat. And then if you have any questions, I think, Christine, you're able to see questions, is that right? And then we'll leave some time at the end for us to respond to any questions if there are any. So yes, so I started writing this book in 2019, so pre-pandemic, which feels like the before times. And it was really prompted by a couple of things. The first is that when my first book came out in 2018, I had a conversation with my editor and my agent about how undiverse the craft spaces I was working in and moving in felt, even though my personal experiences of craft going back to childhood were very diverse, and they had to do with family and community and the classes I was taking at Girls Club. And so, and present day, I was online and I was seeing a lot of crafters who looked like me and who participated in these crafts. And then I'd go to a retreat or teach a class somewhere or be asked to speak. And I would be the only, not only the only Black person there, but often the only person of color in these spaces. And I was getting emails from folks saying, I've always wanted to go to this, but I don't see myself represented there. So what is it like for you? And then, so I pitched a book to my publisher back in 2018, after my first book was published, about women of color who are doing these crafts. And I wanted it to be a coffee table book with lots of photos and interviews, and I would fly out and interview folks and art direct all of this stuff. But a book like that is very, very expensive to produce. And my editor said, no, I think let's see how your first book does, and then we'll come back to it. And then in 2019, those of you who are knitters and maybe a few of you in other crafts, there was an incident that happened that sparked a larger conversation about diversity and inclusion in the craft world. And a lot of people of color came out and started talking about how excluded they felt from these spaces. And so I revisited the idea for this book again and decided this time around that I wanted it to be less about like the people with huge followings, because honestly, in order to produce a coffee table book, you can pretty much only feature people with large followings who are going to promote the book for you. And so instead, I wanted it to be about folks who are just going about this as hobbyists, not just, but you know what I mean, who are hobbyists, people who maybe have a day job and this is their side gig where they bring in a little extra money writing patterns. And then also, you know, folks who are doing this for a living. And what I focused on in the very beginning was doing a survey and finding people who, you know, aren't going to be in the craft blogs, aren't going to be in the magazines, aren't going to be presenting at conferences, most likely also aren't going to be at the conferences because they've felt excluded from those conferences. And so I put out a survey in the spring of 2019 and thought, you know, if I can get 100 people to respond, this would be great. I publicized it on social media. I put it in my newsletter. I asked folks to share, and my goal was to get 100 people by the end of the first weekend, or by the end of the period I set, which I think was a month. And I actually had 120 people by the end of that first weekend. So within 4 days, I had 120 people who'd responded to that survey. And by the end of the month, I had 300 people who had responded to that survey. Now, some of them didn't qualify. Some of them were not in the US or Canada, or hadn't been in the US or Canada in the last year. We had a couple of people who had recently moved. I had an alarming number of white women who took the survey. I think there were maybe a dozen of them, so I had to discount their information too. And at the end of the day, I had about 270, I think it maybe came out to 267 people who had responded to the survey. And so I collated that information. I read everybody's survey responses. I was super excited. Everybody's responses were pretty meaty in this way I hadn't expected, partly because the survey took, you know, if you were just going to skim through it, it would take 10 minutes. If you were really going to be thoughtful about your responses, it would take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And, you know, I got probably 75% really meaty, thoughtful responses, which was surprising to me. Like, I knew that there were at least 300 people out there who do these crafts who look like me, but I didn't expect such a large percentage of them to complete the survey. And then I also interviewed folks. I interviewed, I think, 19 people at the end of the day. I looked at, a lot of it was from social media. Some of it was, sorry, that's my dog. Some of it was referrals from folks that I had interviewed or that I knew. Some of it was research, like I knew that I had a hole in one area of someone who, you know, like there was a group that I felt was underrepresented, or there was a craft I felt was underrepresented. And so I went ahead and searched out folks in that area. And then I also commissioned, I think, 5 essays from people. And those people were a combination of people I knew, I thought had something to say. Like, I knew that crochet is kind of an underdog in the fiber arts world for a variety of reasons. And I really wanted to explore that. And I knew that Adrienne Rodriguez had been doing some research into that. I got a survey response from someone named Chanel Wu, who is non-binary and challenged my use of women. And, you know, I'm still working through that. They were absolutely right. And, you know, but at that point, women was already in the title. Sorry, my dog might say hi in a second. And then there were folks like Mia, who I just knew off the bat that in writing this book needed Mia's voice for a variety of reasons. Mostly having to do with the fact that not only is Mia an incredible knitter, but also Mia is an incredible writer. And hopefully all of you will buy the book, and you'll also be able to read Mia's words about craft and what it means to her and how it ties her, again, because this book is called This Long Thread, how it connects her to culture and history and family. So that all said, and my dog Franny is trying to jump into the conversation, I'm going to introduce you to Mia, and we're going to have a chat about Mia's essay and just, go talk a bit about craft and have kind of an informal conversation. And sorry, Franny is not a crafter, but she does have a lot to say too. So Mia Nakaji, sorry, I'm practicing. Mia Nakaji Monnier. And I'm going to read your bio, which is in the book because otherwise I'll get it wrong, is a writer who lives in Los Angeles. And she focuses on essays and journalism about art, crafts, and culture. Her work has appeared in BuzzFeed, the Oprah Magazine, The Washington Post, and more. But also, Mia and I met because she had created, right? Is that you created a division of Hello Giggles called The Blend. And you interviewed me for that way back in 2018 when my book came out. And I asked Mia to be a part of this because that interview and that article that she wrote about me and my book and about heritage and about how being of color and a mixed race person of color really plays into my work. She got me in a way that very few interviews do. And it was really at the heart of what I wanted to do with this book, which is when you are interviewing someone who has maybe not the same experiences as you, but who can relate to some of the things that you're going through, the interview is a lot deeper and richer than an outsider coming in and trying to make sense of your life and your world. So Mia, I'm going to start with a question that I include in all of my interviews that I did with folks and in the surveys. And the first question is, what are your crafts?
Well, I just want to say thank you first because it meant so much to me. Like, first of all, meeting you and being able to interview you. And when you told me that you felt seen by that article, and I grew up as a shy person, so sometimes I still wonder, why did I choose a job that makes me talk to strangers?
Same.
So I bring this, like, I feel nervous every time I'm profiling someone because I profile people I admire. So I hope that I can write something that will make them feel seen without writing a puff piece, but you're right that we can have these interesting conversations when we have things in common. And then can I take that and hopefully do you justice? So that connection was really special to me. And when you asked me to be part of this book, that was special to me because I admire you a lot as an artist, and also because as a mixed race person, I often feel kind of outside around a group of white people. I feel all the ways that I'm different from them. But then when I go into BIPOC spaces, because I am half white, sometimes I feel nervous, like, am I taking up space here? Should I be here? So when you kind of extended a hand and said, you're welcome in this book, that was really nice. So thank you. And my crafts, the primary one is knitting, but I'm also into crochet, embroidery, sewing. I've tried needle felting, weaving, block printing, thanks to you. Basically, I want to try all the fiber crafts, but knitting is the main one that I keep returning to.
And what is it about knitting that you makes you want to return to it?
I think it was one of the first ones that I learned when I was a kid. My mom was really into crafting and making things, and it was a natural part of her life, I think, because her mom was a tailor and she was always making things. So I remember her first teaching me how to knit with one of those wooden knitting mushrooms, where you're not really knitting with sticks, but you kind of have these loops that you push over one at a time, and it's supposed to be easier for kids, and it makes a cord. So that's how she introduced it to me. And then she first started teaching me how to knit with the actual needles when I was 8 or so. And I didn't take to it right away, but I think I had that early memory of how to do it maybe. So there was something comforting about it. But it's also very portable. Whereas sewing, I love the result of sewing garments especially, but you need to have space to lay out your sewing machine and cut everything and iron everything. And I live in a small apartment and I just haven't carved out that space. So knitting has been really easy to just take with me wherever I go. And I think the better I got at it, the more I wanted to do it also.
Right. Exactly. It's so interesting to me. I'm not a knitter. I'm still not a knitter after all these years of creating things for knitters. But I think there's a barrier to entry with knitting, which is particularly, in the knitting world as we know it, social media, of having to have the right wool or the right yarn and the patterns you work with. Whereas in sewing, you're much more allowed to just make anything you want, using Big Five patterns or not, using polyester or linen. In some ways, sewing is a lot more forgiving, but also sewing is a lot less accessible in terms of what you need to get started. Like, you need space, you need a sewing machine, you might even need a serger. And I know all of these things because I lived in an apartment for a very long time. And if I were sewing, I wouldn't have any space for anything else. It would take over the house. So I'm always jealous of knitters for their ability to like pick up their project and go somewhere, and especially if you're good at it, like have a conversation and knit at the same time.
Or make socks while you're waiting in line, or
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. One of the people I interviewed for the book, Dana, who's doing our Wednesday event, she started knitting because it was something that she could do when her dad was dying. And so it was something she could do while hanging out with him in chemo. And then when he died, it was something she could do when people were coming to the house and grieving and wouldn't know what to say to her as she was grieving, and would just say the most, the hard things to hear, which I think in this country, we don't have a language around grieving. Both of us have mothers from other countries where there's a set of rituals that help you get through it. But Dana would knit and people would ask her about her project, and it led to these conversations around the grief and around her father that were a lot more healing and productive than just the conversation back and forth without the knitting project. So
that's so interesting and beautiful. And I was kind of nervous before this conversation, and hearing you give the intro, I realized one of the reasons is because, like you said, that everyone had meaty answers to these questions, because I think crafting goes really quickly to things like grief or family dynamics or body image and culture and accessibility, times when you felt ostracized. All of those things are in there. And it's really hard to just talk about it on the surface without suddenly stepping into this really heavy emotional thing, which I think is one reason why I like it. I like doing it. I like writing about it, but it's also makes me a little nervous.
Well, let's dig into that. I mean, not to make you more nervous.
No.
So your essay is so much about craft as a way of strengthening your relationship with your mom in particular, both by using it as a way to bond, but also as a way to understand her. And you and I both have mothers that pretty much left the countries they were born in. It's like my mother, your mom is East Asian, Japanese. My mom is Southeast Asian, Filipina. That's a huge, especially for women, that is a huge distance to travel. And then to set up a family in a new place and to have that longing for your own family back home, which is my mom still says that, even though she's lived in the US longer than she ever lived in the Philippines. And even though like her kids are here. But it's really a way, you talk about it as a way to understand yourself through understanding your mom. And when did that strike you? Is that recent, or is that something that dawned on you much longer ago?
I think I noticed it more and more as I get older. Because, you know, I think particularly in that essay, I was talking about my mom, and also times when I would catch myself just knitting while binge watching a TV show, and I'm all hunched over in a chair looking at this little screen, and I have yarn all around me and a lot of clutter all around me. And I've seen my mom in that same position so many times. So that was one of those times when I thought, wow, I've become my mother. And also just like wanting to go to a yarn store for entertainment, or I have plenty of yarn in a stash, but I'm so enticed by this other yarn. Or I've been with my mom in yarn stores and just seeing the way she kind of lights up like a kid, and she's like, oh wow, I could make this blanket, isn't that nice, shouldn't I buy that? And I'm like, no. And I do the same thing. And so I think I've just watched her in all of these different knitting related situations, and I see myself in them now. And I also see, I think as I get older, I look a little bit more like her too. So then I'll notice parts of my appearance that remind me of her, or yeah, it's just kind of everywhere. And I think also there are parts of my mom emotionally that I didn't understand until I became an adult. And I'm sure my understanding will continue to evolve as I get older and I'm closer to her position now. But I remember, you know, you talked about our moms leaving their countries, and my mom talked about that all the time when I was growing up. She would sometimes just call out for her mom randomly while washing the dishes or something. She'd just have a pang and like say that. And she would talk about, you know, I was a little kid, so I thought things were so easy. I would say, oh, just write to your mom. Oh, just write to your friends that you miss. And I didn't understand how heavy a thing that could be until I became older, and I realized how much guilt and shame and all of these things can build up the longer you go without contact with someone. So I think emotionally, I've begun to understand her more as an adult too.
Mm-hmm. And it, you know, I'm younger. I mean, I'm older than you. You're younger, probably about 10 years younger than me. But there was a time where it was really expensive to do long distance phone calls and to keep in touch, and travel was really expensive. And I remember writing to my Lola, to my grandmother, on air letters. I don't know if you remember those. They were really thin paper with postage already applied, and whatever, like, yeah, because it was so expensive. Also because my mother was convinced that if you sent my Lola a card, the postal service would open it up and look for money and then throw it out. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But also this is like my mom's built-in paranoia, which she carried with her to the US. But also understandably, like my mom had a very traumatic childhood growing up in the Philippines during World War, being very young during World War II. And I'm very close to my cousins in the Philippines because we are able to stay in touch via social media. Like the reason I don't quit Facebook is because I get to see all my cousins' kids grow up and have a conversation with them. And my uncle has Alzheimer's, and recently his wife, who has MS, also contracted COVID and was in the hospital. And it was this thing where like all of the cousins got together and was like, what do you need? Do you have enough money? You know, how can we pitch in? And we just all kind of figured it out in this communal way that I think is very just natural in the Philippines, but not as natural here, given our family structures. And it was amazing to have this connection to a different way of being in family.
That is really amazing.
Yeah.
You're so right that it was harder. I can't imagine leaving my family my mom left Japan when she was 22, and it was expensive to write letters or call or let alone visit. I went to Japan only twice when I was a little kid. It was after I was born and after my brother was born. And we have one more brother who we didn't visit Japan with him. So it was just those 2 times in my childhood. And sometimes I'll tell people that now, because there are some people who get to grow up going back and forth, which sounds amazing to me. That wasn't my experience. And sometimes people have said, wow, why didn't you go there more often? And I'm like, that's interesting that you can even ask. It's expensive, and we spent 7 years of my childhood living in a small town in Illinois. So it's not just flying, but it's like getting this whole family to the airport with 3 little kids. And I mean, I wish we had had that experience, and I really feel for my mom and your mom, thinking about how far away they were from their families and how much easier it is now to connect with social media, which is the one nice thing about social media.
It's the only nice thing, that and animals. But the other nice thing about social media too, despite all of its toxicity, is that it opened up a world of craft that I maybe hadn't experienced before. That I actually got into sewing because of blogs. So kind of the precursor to social media as we think of it. And then I can spend a lot of time like looking for patterns or looking at examples of things that people have made with patterns on social media. And there were definitely people in the book, Sukrita, who is going to be in the event at Fancy Tiger in December, but she talks about like scouring social media, looking for people wearing pants like who are her size. She's a fat woman. And she says that that's her self-proclaimed, I'm a fat Asian woman. And she was surprised by the lack of representation overall, but that she could kind of veer down rabbit holes and start to find women who are the same size as her, rocking the pants, providing feedback, providing information on how to adjust it. And so, yes, I think, we talked about how social media has made like fractionized everything. But at the same time, it's in a weird way made space for those of us who are like, like I get ads now for hair care for women who are Black and Asian. Like, how did the algorithm find me? But at the same time, it means that I have started to see people who look like me online because I seek them out in a way that I never saw at, craft conferences.
Yeah.
And that's been a huge deal.
That's so true. That has been really nice. I found that through both knitting and writing. I think I've made a lot of meaningful friendships or connections through social media. So even when I think there's so many bad things about this, maybe it's time for me to quit, I've also gotten so many invaluable things from it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of the stuff that your mom makes, how similar, because I know that you write about taking a knitting class with your mom in Hermosa Beach to stay in touch with, like stay in contact with her. But how similar or different are the things that you make?
I really love that question on your survey because the things we make are so different. She's always saying, oh, you like to make those complicated things. That's not for me. I want to make something simple that I can do in front of the TV. And I don't want to worry too much about it. So she works in an office for a Japanese company, and she took time off from work when I was growing up. So I think she was not working for maybe almost 20 years. And Japanese corporate structures can be really strict. So she's, after having all of this experience, but then taking a couple decades off to raise kids, she started at the bottom, basically, with a lot of people who were closer to my age at the time, in their 20s. So as she spent time there, a lot of people were having babies. So she's constantly making blankets for all of their kids. And she has pictures of the kids with the blankets. It's really sweet. She's very social. She likes making presents for people. She likes improvising a lot. She'll make up her own patterns. If there's anything that can have a cozy or a case, she'll make that. She has one for her phone, my dad's phone, her sanitizer, her keys. She makes like little chair pads for sitting on the couch. She really likes wearing wrist warmers. and
Mhm.
she's always getting cold. Her hands are getting cold while she types, so she has a lot of those. So yeah, that's mostly what she makes. But I'm trying to think. Let's see, we have things in common too in terms of crafting. Like she is the one who showed me Noro yarn, this Japanese self-striping yarn that comes in all of these colors. We're together actually at the yarn shop in my neighborhood where they have a lot of Noro yarn. And she was holding them up and she's like, these colors are so Japanese, don't you think? They look good on Japanese people. And she's like saying it all in Japanese so the people around don't hear what she's saying. But it reminded me that when I was growing up, she would take me to go look for her clothes and she would say, oh, these are all Hakujin colors, like colors for white people. There's nothing that looks good on me. So I wonder if that's part of why she likes to knit, so she can kind of find the colors that she likes and customize the way that she looks. But I grew to love that same yarn because of her. I actually brought some things for show and tell.
Yes, please.
But so this
I
is,
think almost everybody in this in the audience is a knitter. So although I see E there, hi E, who is not a knitter, I don't think. Yeah.
yeah, this is my
Everybody's
first ever sweater that I made maybe 7 years ago. This is Noro yarn. It's that self-striping yarn I mentioned. So it's very simple. But I learned to love this through my mom. She made me leg warmers with a different kind of Noto yarn when I was in college. I don't think I ever figured out a way to pull them off, but I still have them because I can't let them go. And that class we took together that I mentioned in the essay was for making this shawl. So my mom made the same one, just in colors that were in her own colors.
And she didn't find that too complicated?
No, she was cool with it. That's true.
Okay.
I mean, she's very capable too. She can do complicated things that I do. She just doesn't have the patience anymore. And she has a long commute, which I don't have. I work from home. So I understand she's tired and she wants to do things that are soothing. But the thing is, I found things that she made when she was younger, before she had kids, and she was really into complicated things too. So, so I wonder what I'll be like when I'm the age she is now, if I'll follow a similar trajectory or not. Yeah, this was the first time I made something that wasn't just a scarf, and it was really empowering. I thought, oh, I can do all of these things. That means I can probably make more complicated things. And like you mentioned, getting into sewing through the blogs, I was into style blogs first, and then I found knitting blogs probably around that time, 2012 or so. And I thought, wow, these people have been knitting for only a couple of years and they're already making sweaters. I've been knitting for like 15 years and I've only ever made scarves. So it sort of showed me that it was possible. And then that was all I needed to try.
It's funny the things we put in our own way, because for the longest time I refused to sew an invisible zipper because it was too hard. And so it really limited the things that I could sew. And then finally I decided I have to just figure it out. And I was like, this literally saved me 2 hours on a lot of fabric of having to do a wrap skirt or an elastic waist. I can't believe it.
Yeah.
And then but people ask me like, how did you get to the next step? And I said, I finally just pushed myself to do the big scary thing.
Yeah.
And it was not that big and it was not that scary.
I feel the same way about invisible zippers. I've done a couple, but it was a long time ago and I'm afraid of them again, but I just need to try the scary thing. But
Yeah.
that reminds me, I wonder how you feel about this, that that's one thing I love about crafting, is that it's this kind of, it can be a low stakes way to try hard things and get over them and really see yourself making progress or building skills. For me, it's been interesting to see the difference between my process or feelings about crafting versus writing, because they're similar in so many ways. They're like my two artistic pursuits. But with crafting, for me, there's so much less ego involved. I don't worry like, will people like this? How is it going to be received? If I fail at this sweater, does that make me a worthless person? Whereas I do feel these things with writing. But with crafting, it's like just the pure joy of getting better at something and realizing that I can do difficult things. That's awesome. I love it for that.
Yeah, it's the same for me because so craft is part of my job. Although I don't sell craft, I sell to people who do craft. And so there's a lot of stress. And in fact, I'm going to start working with a business coach because there's a lot of stress for me around the creative process now that it feels like the stakes are a lot higher because my career has really taken off in the last year. Like even the last 6 months, things have really shifted for me, even though those are projects I worked on last year. And a lot of the work that is getting out there is stuff I did in 2012 and 2013 when it was like just for fun, right? And I had a day job and I could support myself. And so now that the stakes are higher, it actually feels a lot scarier to do design work because, like I have customers. It feels like there are a few more eyes on me than there were a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. But also I love to sew and I've just started quilting and I love the iterative process of quilting. Like I've made quilts and I get to the end of them and I'm really proud of the work I've done, but also I look at it and think, oh, I used fabric that didn't have enough contrast. So it's kind of busy. And I'm not really sure like how I feel about that, but I know the next time around I'll make some changes. And so there are things that are working in my mind like, oh, it's good to be a beginner. It's good to make mistakes. It's good to have low stakes projects. I'm working on a larger quilt. I started it over the summer and then things got really hectic and all I did was cut. I haven't pieced anything, but also to know that it's there and I'll be able to jump into it and it's like forgiving in its schedule in a way that my work isn't.
Yeah.
And I suspect, I mean, you write for a living. Writing a book was very hard for me. This book in particular, the first one was pretty easy. It's technical. It's like, do this, do this, do this. This book, even though I didn't do a lot of the writing, it was interviews and survey responses. There was just a lot of stress involved in it. And I used to love to write, but this was stressful and it made me realize that, yeah, this might be my second book, my last book. I'm not sure. And, but yeah, when the stakes get higher, the enjoyment changes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, well, first of all, I hope it's not your last book. If you have any desire to write another one, if you don't, that's fair. We'll understand. But but I love this book so much, and I've never written a book before. I'm at the very beginning of thinking about it, and it feels like a whole different scale. If I do end up doing that, it will be a whole new thing that I have to tackle and learn how to do. It's very different from just writing one essay, but it's so true that these things that we started doing for the sake of them, just because they bring us joy, when the context changes, they can become so scary, even if what we want is to share them with an audience or have a few more eyes on us. It changes the relationship.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
interesting too.
I just going to jump in and say one of the things that we talk about a lot in the shop is when your hobby becomes your job, you have to get another hobby. Like you have to have that second thing in there. Jen, did you get a second hobby yet?
Oh, well, sewing has always been my hobby. Always, always. And people will ask me all the time, would tell me like, oh, if you made a bunch of those, I would buy them. Like if I made a bunch of them, they would be $10,000 each. So no.
Yeah.
But also in the book, I talk a lot about the importance of having a hobby and having something in your life that isn't monetized, and about how I think we as Americans, and by extension in a way, Canadians, because the book does include Canadian respondents, I think Canadians have they have a different culture because there's a lot more of a safety net for them than there is here. But Americans aren't allowed to have hobbies. We're not allowed to just do something for the pure enjoyment of it, especially women. Everything has to be monetized, especially people of color. If you think about how many people have to support themselves with multiple jobs and how the gig economy really took off here in a way that it hasn't in countries with a better social network, social safety net. You know, it's, yeah. Yeah, and people often ask me, you know, how to monetize their hobby, and I often tell them, don't. You know, I knew when I started out, the first time I screen printed, I knew that this is what I wanted to do for a living, and my entire life revolved around getting to the point where I could do it for a living. And in fact, I don't screen print very often anymore. It threw out my back, and my back is in decent shape, but as I get older, I don't want to throw out my back again. And, you know, I also interviewed Brandy and Cheyenne Harper, who, if you're a knitter, you're probably familiar with her. She's a knitter and a knit pattern designer in New York, who'll be at the Brooklyn event on Saturday. But she was just knitting until her back hurt and until she had arthritis in her hands and eczema flare-ups. And so she had to shift gears and say, okay, you know, I'm taking a break. I'm going to stop selling the things I knit and I'm going to start selling my patterns.
Yeah, I'm just getting to a point in the past year or two where I noticed that my wrists start to hurt with both writing. Both typing and knitting. And those are the things that I need to preserve the most. So I need to start thinking about that, what I can build into my day to take care of my body so I can keep doing the things I love, hopefully forever.
Yeah, it's a real concern. There are many ceramicists who I know who they tell me, oh yeah, all of us have back issues. Like it's just a problem because we make ourselves the vessels of production.
Yeah.
You know, people talk about how much they want handmade, but there's such a price to pay in handmade. And it's often like, you know, people who do this work ruin their hands and their backs. So, yeah. So what are you currently working on? Hobby-wise, knitting-wise, and life-wise, career-wise?
Well, knitting-wise, I have a sweater next to me, so I can show you. This sweater called Ilha by a French designer whose name I'm not totally sure how to pronounce, Orlan Suka, I think. She makes these beautiful kind of simple, clean lined sweater patterns. It has this cable up the side that I like a lot. So that's my knitting project. Life-wise, well, you had this really nice question in your survey about creative community. So I was thinking about that going into this, that during the pandemic, I quit a part-time writing job or editing job that was kind of burning me out. I was writing about things that I didn't feel very connected to, and I'm not very good at compartmentalizing in that way of saying, okay, I'm going to spend these hours writing about a product you can buy of this website or something, and then spend these other hours developing my own writing. I thought that I could do it, but it turned out that I couldn't. So I've spent this past year sort of trying to get back in touch with what I want to be writing and seeking out all of these classes taught by writers that I admire. And during the summer, I was able to do a couple of workshops, and I ended up bonding a lot with the people who were in my workshop groups. And so now I have this really amazing writing community, and that has made so much difference. So I think that's one of my life projects right now. Yeah, Tria is here. Hi, Tria. Thanks for coming. Yeah, so I'm continuing that process of, you know, building community and getting to know who I am and what I want as a writer, while also, yeah, knitting a lot. How about you?
That's amazing. What am I currently working on? Let's see. So I'm starting business coaching. I'm in a business coaching group. I'm very excited about that because it's going to help me work through my unnecessary attachment to doing the administrative and clerical work in my business because it's a lot less scary than doing the creative work in my business. So there's that. I am also decorating my house, which this summer I moved across the country and I a house. Actually, I bought a 2-unit building, so I'm a landlady now. But I have the top 2 floors, and I have a studio in my attic. But I'm really I'm going hard into the nesting because winter's coming up, and I'm really thinking about like what all my winter projects are going to be and which rooms I'm going to paint. And that feels like my real creative project right now. I'd like to say I'm sewing, but I'm not really sewing. I need to make some winter clothes because my winter clothes are not winter enough. I mean, I get to walk around in a big bulky parka now, so that's fantastic because I can just hide. Like I can wear the same thing 5 days in a row, no one will know. But I did buy some long underwear today. I went online. It was so cold yesterday. I had to buy long underwear. Although that might be a good thing for me to sew because that's really simple and straightforward.
Ooh.
And then other stuff work-wise, I'm just trying to get through the rest of the year. This is the busiest time of the year for me, and I don't really get to choose when my books are going to launch. They just happen to launch this week, right before Thanksgiving. But that's, I'm really excited that this book is out in the world. And there was a time in the middle of writing it where I just didn't want to do it anymore, and I was willing to give my advance back and revisit it another time. I don't think that's an unusual feeling from what I've heard, but it got to this point where everything clicked and everything felt really good, and I was really happy with the manuscript. And then I got it back. I got it in the mail probably about a month ago, and I found a typo the first page I opened to in the middle of the book, but it felt really, I'm really happy with it. And I reread your essay this morning so that I could make sure that I hadn't forgotten things and refresh my memory and have questions to ask you. And I just thought, okay, if nothing else, if I got Mia's beautiful essay out into the world, this book accomplished that, I'm done. It just felt really good.
It did so much more than that. I knew this book was going to be good, but reading it, it's so much better than I even expected. It's just, I'm falling in love with everyone one by one because,
Oh yeah.
Everyone does have these meaty answers. They're sharing such personal things, and they all have such interesting, specific perspectives, but I feel connected with all of them.
That's
Yeah.
what happened to me.
I'm reading the digital version. And I generally don't like digital books because you can't feel connected, but you have written in such a way that I feel like all of these people are my friends, they're going to come over for dinner. It's really, really fantastic. And I'm so thrilled for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mia, okay, so we have talked about what you're making now and what I'm making now, and I think maybe we should turn it over to questions. Christine, were there questions?
The only question I see in the chat is from me about what is your new hobby? Does anybody have anything they want to say? We can also bring you on screen if you are interested in talking. Anyone?
Or if anyone wants to say because one of the big parts of the book, which was my editor's idea, which I love, is that question, what are you making now?
Yeah.
And it's woven throughout the book, the answers. So Lori, you have a question, but sort of afraid to ask it. You can type it. You can send it to just
you can send it to just you, I think.
Send it to just me. Do you know how to do that? You click on where it says to, and you just change it to my name. And if I see it, but anybody else tell us what you're making right now.
I wish there was a way to just switch it from webinar to regular Zoom, but I don't believe I can do that.
Yeah, I don't.
Because then everybody could show us what they're working on.
So let's see. We've got Jody Feldman asked, please say more about whether we are getting more or less inclusive as a crafting community. I think that we are getting slowly but surely more inclusive, and there are a lot of hiccups, but that doesn't mean that folks shouldn't stop trying, because what I think culturally we want a really quick solution to a problem that has been 400 years in the making. And people expect it to be all better. Like, you can do these 5 things and everything will be better in 3 months, and it's just not that way. And, I still get asked the same things. I still get asked to speak for very little money or for free. Some conferences have gotten much better about their lineups being more diverse, but often that translates into having like 2 Black folks and maybe 1 Asian American person, and that doesn't feel, it feels better, but not great. It's, yeah. So are we getting more inclusive as a craft community? We're not getting less inclusive. But craft is a reflection of this country as a whole, and you cannot separate it from the greater forces in the country. So you can see every time, we had the Civil War, we had, after that, there were a lot of rights put in for previously enslaved people in this country. Things were getting better. And then, bam, there was a clampdown, right? And the KKK came back into prevalence. That's just the thing that happened. We had the Civil Rights Movement, right? We had Voting Rights Act. We elected a Black president. Voting rights were very quickly taken away, stripped away. And so it's this constant iteration of things. It's this constant working, things getting better, they're being pushed back. I think right now we are in the things slightly getting better. Also, they're being pushed back. And I don't know. I honestly, I don't know. I don't think things are going to get better in a year. We've only really been talking about January, February of 2019. It's not even 3 years since then. Things move slowly, And the reason I wrote this book partly is that I wanted those of us who are people of color who are doing these crafts to have a space on the page where we were talking to each other about the work that we're doing. So that there is at least, that place that we've made for ourselves.
I love that about your book, Jen, that you wrote that in the introduction, that this book, you wrote it specifically for women of color. It's not a book that's explaining women of color to the larger crafting world or to white people or saying, hey, here's proof that we're people. It's just a nice, nurturing, gathering place. I love that.
Thank you. That's really what I wanted. Michelle asks, some of my textiles with Ruby Star Society, can I speak a little about my experience designing for the quilt industry? Yeah, I design fabric. I guess in many ways, I don't feel like I design so much for the quilt industry. I just create fabric for them. So I'm not specifically working towards that end. I don't know how to explain that dichotomy, but I don't feel like I'm a part of the industry, intentionally so. There are a number of reasons why, but one of them is that industries like knitting and quilting tend to undervalue the labor that's put into that the folks who participate in these crafts, whether professionally or as hobbyists, put into it. This may get me canceled by the industry, I don't know. But it shows up in the compensation that is offered to us. Now, I make a decent amount of money as an artist, I will say that. But like as a speaker, as a teacher, these are industries that do not pay very well. And so by keeping myself removed from that and not having to do all the work that a lot of folks have to do to remain engaged in the industry, I feel like I'm preserving something, I'm reclaiming my time. Let me just say that. I will never be canceled. I probably will be canceled at some point, but it's okay. But I love working with Ruby Star Society. I have loved working with that team back when they were Cotton and Steel. I joke that now there are like 4 Black fabric designers. E, who's on this call, I saw her name here, is one of them. The other, and E, your brand's spanking new. And then the other one is Ann Kell. But then it's me and Rashida, and we both work for Ruby Star. So yeah. So it's very funny that there's like, you know, there are very few of us and 2 of us work in the same place. Let's see, Lori says, I've ordered the book and I can't wait. I would also love to see an actual space for Black and brown crafters to be, where we don't have to explain racism or defend ourselves from racism, a place for Black and brown folks just to be. Do I see social media creating such a space? I would love to create one, and I'm not sure how to begin. Oh my gosh, there's a lot going on there. Social media can create such a space, but that means that whoever is hosting it needs to be very deliberate. There is a book by Priya Parker, and I can't remember the name of the book, but if you just look at Priya Parker, she has written a book about hosting events and creating intentional spaces. And it's really about how everything around, I read it a couple of years ago, actually during the beginning of COVID, and then of course can't use it. Art of Gathering, thank you.
I was gonna say that.
I think that's a really good, she has so many good ideas about how to create these spaces and these events that are thoughtful. And I highly recommend that. I think I borrowed it from my library on my Kindle. There are also, I was just interviewed for the second time by Lisa Woolfolk, who is in the book and is also a professor of English literature at University of Virginia. She created an organization called Black Women Stitch, specifically because she got tired of going to these events and only being the only Black woman and like being told not to talk about certain topics. She has a podcast called Stitch Please. Like Stitch Please. Yes. So that is a place to start. I think there was also an Instagram account called Meet Makers of Color, which was great, but the people running it, I think, just had other jobs and it became overwhelming. So it would be something that I would love to see if it were created to be funded, so that, you know, whoever is running this and hosting it is being paid for their labor. But that is not a project for me. Lori, if that is something you want to take on, you know, just a small project like that. But Lori, I think if you haven't listened to Stitch Please, or if you don't follow Lisa Woolfolk, really amazing person to follow. It's Black Women. She's Black Women Stitch on Instagram, and also is very not only inclusive but very intersectional. So, you know, email me and I'm happy to make an introduction. Anyone else? Okay. I'll give 30 seconds. How does that sound? And then I thought we could close by talking about the title of the book. Okay. So when I pitched the book, it had the title, which was a placeholder, called The Community Book. And my editor and my agent kept saying, that's not going to sell a book. So you need to come up with a better title. And they kept hounding me for it. And I said, it'll all become clear when I read the survey responses. I just know this. So give me a little bit more time and I'll figure it out. And after about a couple of days of reading through survey responses, I found the title, and it was because of a response from Cecile Lewis, who is in her 60s and is a teacher and a natural dyer, a quilter, and an artist in Minneapolis. She wrote, "The stitch is a human invention that binds us. It is an old, expressive, and universally understood language. The stitch is ubiquitous in its application. It mends tattered garments and surgical incisions. It holds together the precious elements of haute couture, as well as the blocks of a quilt that welcomes a new baby. The stitch closes the winding sheet. Humans have employed stitches throughout history. The stitch is made with a thread that encircles the globe. It travels through continents, cultures, and eras. I am just another hand that touches this long, long thread." So that quote opens the book. And then everybody who completed the survey or contributed to the book, I sent them a little card of Ms. Lewis's words. So thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Mia. Follow Mia online. You can see all her beautiful knitting projects. And we're all going to will a book by Mia into existence, right?
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be able to participate in this with you and get a chance to talk with you again.
Yeah,
It
thank
was
you.
a nice interview.
Thank you both so much. I'm sorry for my early fumbling. I get so crazy in a Zoom. I love the title, This Long Thread, because it's hopeful, right? That we can thread it together, this crazy world, our issues as humans. And I think this book is a great beginning. It's really, I wish I had the physical one, which should be here Tuesday.
Tomorrow. Yeah, okay.
Tuesday or tomorrow. And anyone who hasn't purchased the book or would like to purchase it, I put the link in the chat. Jen has been kind enough to actually sign copies. So we will have signed copies here at the shop. You can purchase it online. We'll apply your $5 entrance fee to the purchase of the book. So you're winning all around. And then I guess lastly, it seems like we don't have too many Swapna's here. Hi, Swapna. We have so much planned here at the bookstore and the yarn shop. We have a Shenanigans trunk show next week. The Roosevelt High School shop class is selling their work on Sunday. And then December 2nd starts our holiday night markets. And that will go for 3 weeks until Christmas. So that's it for all the news here at the store. And thank you again. This will be recorded and we'll have it up on our YouTube channel. And Jen and Mia will definitely send you the link.
Thank you so much. Okay,
Yeah.
well, it's 8 o'clock here, so I'm going to sign off and take my dog out.
Yay! Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Bye.